Corruption by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 15. Angel looked through her window and saw Roland's pickup pulling up and knew immediately something was wrong. As a cop and a psychologist, her parents never blindsided her. They had been straight talking to her since she was 2. "Why should I get you a new dolly if you were just going to set her hair on fire?" is a perfect example. She got out of the car and walked around to the other side and waited for Roland to join her. Their eyes locked, and she watched him until distracted by the sound of the front door. She turned to see her father come out on the porch. Angel and Roland walked to meet him at the steps. "Dad, what's going on?" Her dad slid his arm around her and reached his hand out to Roland. "Roland, thanks for coming." They shook hands completely at ease with one another. "No problem, Jerry. Sounds like you need me for something?" Roland replied, his misgivings soothed by Jerry's relaxed demeanor. Jerry turned to Angel. "Hey, babe, we weren't expecting you tonight." Angel moved away from her dad and slid her hand down Roland's arm, letting it come to rest in his. He squeezed it. "It seems like he needs to speak to both of us," she said, and they walked hand in hand up the steps. Angel and Roland both paused and took a deep breath in when they stepped inside the house. The air smelled of homemade bread. As they moved closer to the kitchen, the additional smells of grilled peppers, onions, mushrooms, and ham blended together. It was late, and no one had eaten dinner. While Angel changed her clothes, Roland and Jerry cleared the kitchen table, and Roland set the table while Jerry got drinks. Eating in the kitchen, still warm from the oven, sitting at a smaller, more intimate table, and the soft lighting created a comforting atmosphere. Little did the group know that was exactly how Francine Dale planned it. "Angel, don't just eat the fries," her father warned. And with that simple command, Angel knew her father was in protective mode. She looked at him directly. "Dad, what is going on?" Jerry Dale sighed and began to relate everything that Ruth Mayberry had told he and Sam the day before. Angel and Roland sat quietly chewing and listened without interruption. When he had finally finished, the table's occupants were quiet. It was Angel that finally broke the silence. "So it's possible Violet's mother is this Cindy Mailer, whereabouts unknown, and her dad is a dirty cop." Roland did not miss the fact that when recounting that portion, Jerry Dale watched him carefully. "What's the name of this cop?" he asked pointedly. "Stan Granger." Roland took a sharp intake of air, and Angel looked over at him. "What is it? You know him?" Roland took another deep breath. "He's my ex-partner," he said to Angel, and then looked at Jerry Dale. "This is why you wanted me to come over, isn't it? You want to know if I knew he was dirty, or even worse, if I'm dirty too?" Roland said, disgusted. "What? Dad, you can't think—" She stopped abruptly and bit her bottom lip. Roland looked at her with suspicion. "What, Angel? What is it? What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice full of hurt and anger. Angel, who had just remembered the list of cops that was currently in her bag, looked at him guiltily. Christopher looked around the table and put his napkin down slowly on his empty plate. "Should I go?" he asked quietly. Much to his surprise, Francine Dale burst out laughing. "Don't be ridiculous, Christopher," she said, her voice full of amusement. "If one thing anyone at this table knows is that there is absolutely nothing about you that screams dirty cop." Her mother's words polarized Angel's thoughts, and instantly she knew the emotion she felt when she saw Christopher's name at the bottom of that list. Trust and fear. Not once did she think Roland's name was on that list because he was a dirty cop. But knowing that list may be what got Clark Kincaid in trouble, she feared Roland was in danger. She got up from the table and went for her bag. She dropped by the little table in the hallway by the front door. When she returned to the kitchen table, Christopher hadn't moved, but her mother and father had started clearing the table. Angel picked up the platter with some leftover steak fries and put it on the counter near the sink, placed her bag on the chair, opened it, and pulled out the blue folder. She explained, "Clark Kincaid was assaulted this morning. I was going to meet him because he said he had some information. The case I was working on for him was finished, so at first I blew him off because he's been getting too friendly." She avoided Roland's eyes. "But then he said if my detective friend was important to me, I would be interested in what he had to say." Roland scoffed. Jerk. He didn't miss the smirk that passed between Francine and Jerry. Angel must have told them about their earlier disagreement. Angel went on to explain to her parents what happened when she went to meet Clark Kincaid that morning. Roland nodded. He hadn't read Bash's report on her interview with Angel, but what Angel was saying was consistent with the summary Bash provided him at the hospital, all except one thing. "So it was you that insisted on meeting at the office that early. Why?" Angel looked at Roland pitifully as if he were still stuck in jealous mode, but Roland rushed to explain. "Technically, it could look like you set him up to be assaulted." His voice faded away. Angel sucked her breath in and checked his face to see if he were serious, but Roland couldn't keep a straight face. She grinned at him. "He insisted on dinner first, okay? I didn't want to meet him for dinner, so I said the office early in the daylight." And before Roland could interrupt, "No, don't ask me to explain further. You're a crack investigator. You know why I didn't want to meet him for dinner." Angel's dad chuckled. Angel pulled the items out of the folder, and they all looked at the contents. No one spoke as they read, each putting the invoices into context with Ruth Mayberry's account. They handed each piece to the other as they finished scrutinizing the details. Finally, the list of names went around and ended with Christopher, who sat staring at the list, his hands flattened to each side of it on the table. After several steadying breaths, he spoke, his face still staring at the table. "Are all the cops on this list dirty?" No one spoke, but when he finally lifted his head, he saw three faces grinning at him. "No," they all answered in unison. Christopher, despite his mood, said with a chortle, "I wasn't testing you guys," he said, and then admitted, "This list was not in the bag that was turned in for evidence by Clark Kincaid." Angel's hand balled into a fist and she beat the table. "That piece of—" She glanced at her mother, whose eyebrows went up with a harumph. "Piece of detritus?" Angel finished lamely. Jerry and Christopher laughed. Angel smiled at her mom. "He must have copied everything in the bag and handed over the originals minus the list." She thought for a minute, drumming the table with her fingers. "If that list contains dirty cops—" "Or cops that could be dirtied up," her father corrected her. "Or cops that could be dirtied up," she repeated. "Then maybe Clark was attacked because he decided to try his hand at blackmail," Angel finished. "But why the assumption that the people on the list are bad?" Francine Dale asked. Roland cleared his voice and answered carefully. "Because the victim in the house on Blackbird Lane was Simon Rain." He looked at Angel when he spoke, and he watched his words register. Her eyes went wide, her mouth dropped open, and she stopped breathing. All at once, Jerry Dale released a slow whistle. Francine said, "Isn't that—" And Angel slapped the table with her hand and said, "No way!" Christopher looked at the shocked faces. "We haven't released the name of the victim to the public." He paused and looked at Angel. "I was going to tell you, but we—" Angel gave him a playful nudge in the ribs. "We haven't been communicating very well lately, have we?" Christopher put his arm around her shoulders and gave her a squeeze, and then let her go. "The official cause of death, rapid death due to ketamine intoxication. He was found just sitting there in an armchair with his eyes open." The occupants of the room mulled over the new information for a few moments. Roland was still looking at his name on the bottom of the list. Jerry sat back in his chair and sipped his coffee in reflection, and Angel watched her mother. Francine Dale had been mainly quiet during much of the discussion, save for a few one-word comments here and there. Now she sat in quiet contemplation, and Angel recognized the look. So did Jerry Dale. Christopher lifted his head and looked at Angel, then at her father, and then at Francine Dale. Not quite knowing what was going on, he followed suit and remained quiet. "What kind of man is Simon Rain?" she asked when she finally spoke. Angel answered first. "You remember Simon Rain, Mom, the real estate guy who was paying someone to intimidate property owners into selling their holdings. What else do you need to know?" "But what kind of man is he?" her mother repeated, and then added, "Pops often call profiling guesswork, and in a way it is. But it's a lot more than that. Knowing where a person has been can often tell you where he is going, or in this case, why he's done what he's done. Simply put, Simon Rain had that list. Knowing who he is and where he's been may tell you what he was planning on doing with it." It was Christopher's turn to contemplate. When he found out how Simon Rain's involvement led to the attack on Violet, he had done a complete background check on him. He reached for his cup, which Jerry filled when he discovered it was empty, and he tried to regurgitate the information he learned to answer Francine's question. He was raised by a single mother who worked in a factory to support him. He tried to rise above poverty. He began working at the age of 13, car dealership, I believe. Went to the local community college and went to a state school for business. Christopher sat back and crossed his arms over his chest. By all accounts, he was pretty successful. He was also pretty smart. He had no criminal record, and no one suspected any criminal activity until we connected him to the attack on Violet. Angel interrupted his recitation. "Who owns the house on Blackbird Lane?" Christopher shot her a look. He smiled affectionately at her and shook his head, not because he didn't want to tell her who owned the house, but because she always amazed him when she hit on an important piece of information. With one question, seemingly without even trying. 1462 Blackburn Lane is owned by Donna Stark, the mother of Simon Rain, who, by the way, is also the owner of the severed finger found in the bag deposited at Simon Rain's feet. Francine Dale gasped. "No." Christopher nodded and explained his visit to the hospital to see Clark Kincaid was not his first visit to the hospital in line with this case. He explained about Donna Stark, including how she stated she was found by the kidnappers. "Doesn't make sense," Jerry interjected. "Why kidnap the mother if they had planned to kill Simon Rain?" "Dad's right." She looked at Christopher. "Roland, you may have two perpetrators on your hands." Christopher thought about her statement, slightly distracted by Angel's reverting back to calling him Roland. "There is that possibility," he conceded. "Why two perpetrators?" Francine Dale asked. Angel answered her, "Because kidnappers do what they do in exchange for what they want. You can't get a ransom for a dead guy." "But maybe they changed their mind after they kidnapped his mother," Francine insisted. Christopher shook his head. Cause of death for Simon Rain was a ketamine overdose, but the medical examiner did say there was evidence in his hair that he had been systematically poisoned for at least a month. No longer, though, because there were no changes in the heart, the arteries, or the liver. Maybe whoever did it wasn't quite sure of the dose needed to kill him. Anyway, it's reasonable to believe that the person who wanted Simon Rain dead is not the person who kidnapped his mother. "Have you figured out when his mother was kidnapped from the dentist?" Angel asked. Christopher shook his head again. "No, Bash is going through video from the building where her dentist is located." They all sat in silence except for the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, and the whirring of the fan over the kitchen table. It was Francine who made a move first. "Angel, go to the upstairs closet and get everything you need to make up the couch on the porch. Angel looked confused. Mom? Make up the couch for Christopher. Christopher lifted his head and began shaking it vigorously. No, no, that's okay. I should head home. His actions belied his words as he stayed seated and stared down at the list again. Angel. Angel recognized the tone and glanced at her father, who nodded. She got up from the kitchen table and made her way up to the linen closet just outside her parents' bedroom. She grabbed sheets, a blanket, and two pillows and returned to the kitchen. Christopher had not moved, but looked at them all somewhat dejected. Francine got up and put her hand on Christopher's shoulder. I don't think being alone is the best thing for you right now. Get some sleep. Things always look different in the morning. Christopher lay on the strikingly comfortable porch. He wanted to run through the information that Jerry provided from Ruth Mayberry, the attack on Clark Kincaid, and the names on the list. But after a moment his mind quieted, and the muffled voices and soft footsteps filtered through the ceiling and strangely soothed him as he drifted off to sleep. Angel finished her shower and put her things in the guest room. She still had some clothes, shoes, and makeup in the closet, because it wasn't unusual for her to spend the night at her folks' place. It was unusual for her boyfriend, could she use that word, to be sleeping downstairs on the sectional on the closed-in porch. Christopher was a strong man who had no problem showing emotion. She had seen that when she was injured last year. He was kind and patient with Violet and affectionate with herself when they were alone, and she knew he was jealous about Clark Kincaid. But it hadn't registered how much he was in turmoil about his ex-partner and his name being on that list until her mother insisted he stay the night. She glanced at the space under her parents' doorway and saw their light was still on. She put on her robe, crept down the hallway, and tapped on their door. She entered at her father's invitation and grinned sleepily at them, realizing they had been expecting her. You all settled in, my love? Her mother asked quietly, patting the bed for Angel to sit down. Angel assumed her usual position, since she became too big to crawl in between them under the covers, cross-legged in the center of their bed at their feet. She grabbed one of her mom's cursed decorative pillows and hugged it tightly. Yeah, Mom. Are you worried? Her mom asked softly. Yes, but not as worried as I was before we met here and got a chance to talk to Christopher. She paused and glanced at both of them, but then looked away. When I saw that list with his name on it at first, I didn't know how I felt. But then when you said how we knew he was innocent, I realized that what I felt for him was fear. Yeah, it was all over your face at dinner. Her dad smiled at her, look of embarrassment. No, don't worry. I don't think Christopher realizes how you feel about him yet. How I feel about him? Her parents looked at one another and smiled, and shook their heads, and Angel rolled her eyes. What I can't figure out is why you two had to get us over here. When I looked at that list at the hospital, my cool-headed investigative skills deserted me, and I ran from the hospital all willy-nilly when I should have just waited for him and talked to him calmly. She looked at her parents again, and they both looked at her with big smiles, and their eyebrows quirked as if to say, I told you so. And Angel rolled her eyes again. You guys are irritating. This time they laughed out loud, and Angel announced she was going to bed. They blew kisses at her as she left the room. Francine drank from her bedside water glass and turned out the light. She snuggled next to Jerry, and his arms wrapped around her tightly. Our daughter is in love, Francine said with a smile. Yeah, Jerry sighed into Francine's hair. Heaven help us.